Let's talk to Marc Ostwald, who's Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM Investor Services International. Good to see you again, Marc. So we were hearing there about lots of different things coming out of the United States, those inflation numbers higher, talk from Jamie Dimon about recession perhaps still being on the table. What do you think all that says about the state of the American economy and where it's going next?
Well, I think the inflation problem is a problem everywhere. There are second-round effects. A lot of this is basically, if I looked at the inflation data today, it was gasoline prices, it was airfares, it was still housing, which will gradually cool off. But there are pressures there, and that's why the Fed is being cautious. I think more importantly, actually, the U.S. economy for the time being is actually performing pretty well, but it does face a number of challenges. First of all, the presidential election will gradually, as we go through the year, become more of a focal point. What sort of things might happen if former President Trump were to win? There could be actually quite a dramatic shift in the Inflation Reduction Act, which has powered a lot of the energy transition. There's a lot of talk about subsidies for electric vehicles being removed. Not necessarily the whole of the Inflation Reduction Act being repealed. There are risks from elsewhere, and there are obviously a large array of global political tensions which could pose a threat. But for the time being, it's humming along at a respectable pace, certainly a much more respectable pace than Europe, be that the Eurozone or the UK, and indeed China, despite the best efforts at the moment to try and actually fire up the Chinese economy, particularly starting to address those property market issues.
Well, let's talk about China, because there has actually been an uptick in inflation there, which has been well received.
Yes, it has, insofar as it is a welcome move back into positive territory. However, when I looked at the data, a lot of it was travel services, a lot of it was actually base effects in food, neither of which are likely to be long-lasting. And if one looked at the producer price data, which was slightly weaker than expected, that, as an initial state of demand, suggests that demand is still not quite picking up. Perhaps the measures which have been taken, above all to try and stimulate the property market, and get some order into the property sector, get some balance sheet reconciliation going, will fire it up a bit. Certainly, we know that anything to do with renewables or chips, high technology, is certainly doing very well and supporting the Chinese economy in a very important way. But it's the other parts, above all, I think private consumption, consumer spending, which remains rather sluggish.
Let's talk about the UK. We know the economy here is now in recession. New figures showing that inactivity is persistently high when it comes to the number of people in work. High inflation still, of course. How do you gauge the health of the UK economy?
Well, with the UK, I think it's going to be flirting with the recession for quite some time. The problem is that there is no room for fiscal stimulus, as we saw in the budget last week. Whatever measures are taken are basically offset by prior measures. The structural problems in terms of the labour market are enormous, whether that's people not going to work because the cost of childcare is too high. The NHS basically is struggling to deal with, or to be more proactive in terms of healthcare, and the waiting lists are enormous. And the infrastructure of the country has been neglected for many a year. And each time we get a new big infrastructure project like the HS2 project, what one finds in the end is it's a shadow of what was originally planned. And that infrastructure basically hampers investment. And as long as people don't feel the confidence to invest in the UK, above all because of the constant change of governments, the investment flows won't be there. And that's really what needs to change, that investors, above all business investors, feel the confidence that they've got a path ahead where they can make long-term plans. And at the moment, I don't think that's necessarily the case.